Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the third meeting of discourse analysis. Today we're going to talk about discourse and society. So let's start with discourse community. In our previous meeting, we have already known about speech community. Discourse community is just the same as speech community, but we have to remember that a discourse can be spoken and it can be written too. So a discourse community must have a set of shared common goals that may be formally or implicitly agreed by its members. And then some mechanism for communication, some way of providing the exchange of information among its members. And then its own particular genres or types of discourse, and then its own set of specialized terminology and vocabulary and a high level of expertise in its particular area. So these are some examples of discourse communities. For example, call centers or customer service. So I have two kinds of examples here. Thank you for calling Sam's Goods. My name is Eric. How can I help you? So this kind of call center, maybe you can hear it in some kind of company. For example, this one is a coat company. The name is Sam's Goods. So the customer service, in order to show his hospitality, he needs to introduce himself and then how can I help you? And then another example of call center is the 911 call center. Call center for 911 is for emergency situation. Therefore, they don't need to introduce themselves because it will be bad for the one who calls, right? For example, 911, what's your emergency? So this one is more direct. And then the next one is religious communities. For example, in religious events, we often hear the use of other languages such as Arabic, especially in Muslims' religious events. For example, in Da'wah, etc. The next example is African American community. So you know the term black people or black person is kind of rude. So it's better for us to say African American or African American descendant. They often use African American Vernacular English or AAVE. If you want to know what kind of language this is, you can Google it because it actually has special or different characteristics from formal English. And this AAVE is often researched by linguists also. Okay, for the example of call center or customer service, they have their own linguistic repertoire. You have already studied about repertoire in social linguistics. This is all the linguistic varieties such as registers, dialects, styles, accents, etc. And it is based on the terminology and vocabulary for the product or service they are dealing with. So all customer service always have their own terminology or vocabulary that they always use in order to receive the call for the callers or from the customers. And then they also have common goals, which is to provide the service or making the sales common ways of sharing information among telephone workers. And then they also have their own particular service called genre. So the genre of their discourse is to give service. And then they also have specific level of expertise. You know, there are call centers that have expertise, the one who have worked in that kind of area for a long time, for example, that has more knowledge about the products or the service or in the way they deal with the callers. Members of a discourse community may have a linguistic repertoire that they use in their linguistic interaction. They may have a number of languages or language varieties to interact within their particular communities. For example, in religious speech, the speaker often mentions Quran's chapters or verses. And then social factors, for example, the person we talk to or the social context, topic, function, etc., are also important in order to choose a language variety. So in a discourse community, how do we choose a language variety that we should use between the members? So we have to know the social factors. Okay, the next is discourse and gender. The analysis of gender and discourse is done by examining the ways language is used in relation to the social category of gender. For example, the term woman and lady. So at first, the term woman is considered as impolite, but then as the time goes by, it has moved from impolite to polite in a normal situation. On the other hand, the term lady or ladies may be used as a politeness marker in formal settings, but then it also has moved especially in informal settings, because it is also used to trivialize and patronize. You don't know what trivialize and patronize is? Go to Google Translate. Okay, so gender is not something a person has, but something that a person does. So you have to know that gender is different from sex. Gender itu beda dengan jenis kelamin. Sex is something that we have since we're born, something that defines us as a male or a female. For example, in biological aspect, male has the hormone of testosterone and then female has the hormone estrogen. But gender is not like that. Gender is something that we do. How a man or a woman talks or speaks or dresses, walks, acts. So gender and other identities is not a result of what people already are, but they are a result of the way they talk and what they do. The relationship between language and gender is almost always indirect. It's always mediated by something else. The ways that people speak are associated with particular roles, activities, and personality traits, such as being a mother, or when a female or a male is gossiping, and then when they are being modest. So our roles in society will be a media in how we use language, and that too would be related to our gender. So maybe you will think about, oh, this is only a stereotype because there are exceptions. Not all women do what other women speaks, for example. But you have to know, you have to remember that a theory is produced by a research, and the majority of the data results is what determines a theory. Jadi, ketika kalian melihat ada sebuah teori yang menentukan bahwa wanita itu selalu seperti ini dalam menggunakan bahasa, atau pria selalu menggunakan bahasa yang seperti ini, lalu kalian berpikir, ini adalah sebuah stereotip yang tidak selalu terjadi karena there are exceptions. That's okay, you can think that way, but it will be better if you to do your own research on that exception, sehingga kalian bisa mendobrak semua stereotip itu. Okay, now we're going to talk about discourse and identity. Just like gender, identity is conveyed in discourses. Identity is recognized not only in the way people talk, but also in the way they behave as they speak to each other. Okay, so the study of language and identity. Back then, it always looks at the relationship between social variables. For example, social class and linguistic variables. For example, pronunciation, non-standard grammar, etc. But now, the study of language and identity also looks at how the identity is constantly and principally formed in through a language in a discourse. So, for now, we have already expanded the study of language and identity. The information about a person or their identity depends very much on the context, occasion, and purpose of the discourse. It also depends on the space and place where the discourse happens. When we speak or when we write, we are telling other people something about ourselves and relating to people in particular ways. For example, is the identity of Sabrina and Mahnur in our assignments in the previous weeks. So, for example, Sabrina replied, someone that wrote, hijabi don't need to wash their hair. And Sabrina replied that we are Muslims, not cave women. So actually, from this kind of writing or this discourse, you already know the identity of Sabrina. First, she is a Muslim. And second, you also know the behavior of Sabrina, the characteristic, because she speaks some satirical comments, so maybe you can assume that she is somewhat a sarcastic person. So, from what I have read in your assignments, some of you wrote that I don't know what kind of person Sabrina and Mahnur is. But actually, you can know the identity or how the person is or how the person behaves from just what they speak or what they write. So it's nonsense if you tell me that you cannot tell what a person is like by the way they talk or they speak. Okay, now we're going to talk about discourse and ideology. Ideology is a set of beliefs. So everything that you believe is what it is called as ideology. Ideology is not only religions, for example, Islam, Christian, etc., but everything that we believe. Threadgold stated that texts are always related to ideology. In spoken and written discourse, we can take a look at not only the linguistic categories, but also the process of which dominant ideologies are reproduced in that discourse. For example, you can also see this example in Baldrich's book. You're getting engaged. I threw up. I saw the ring and I threw up. That's not normal, etc., etc. So when you take a look at this example, you can know who believes that marriage is good and who believes that it is the opposite. For example, Charlotte is the one that believes that marriage is good and should be done as soon as possible. However, Carrie and Samantha believes the opposite. They believe that marriage is not good and marriage should not be done as soon as possible. Just from what they speak. Just from what they speak in this example. And then after that, you can also know what kind of culture they have. For example, in Indonesia or in other ASEAN countries, most of us maybe believe that it is good to marry as soon as possible. However, in Western area or Western countries, they believe that it is the opposite. They love freedom, right? And they love to be single and no commitment in their life. So that's why they are not in rush in terms of marriage. So that means this kind of discourse, it's probably done, or it's probably happened in a Western country. And then the assignment for this meeting, you have to do the task in Partridge book, page 33 and 34, number 1 until number 3. And it is a group discussion, so you can discuss it with your groups, but every member of your group should submit it one by one. Okay, so now we're going to have our discussion writtenly in classwork. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.